On Labor Day, my son-in-law called me the family's maid and announced I was being kicked out of the house. I smiled and showed him the contract my husband had left regarding the family business. On Monday, he called me begging for forgiveness. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The Labor Day lunch had been my idea. I'd spent the entire morning in the kitchen, preparing my famous pot roast, the buttery mashed potatoes that my late husband Ellington used to rave about, and the apple pie that was always the first to disappear at family gatherings. I wanted everything to be perfect, just like it had been when Ellington was alive. I didn't realize I was setting the stage for my own humiliation. "Madeline, the potatoes are a bit lumpy this time," George remarked, barely looking up from his plate. My son-in-law had always been critical, but lately his comments had grown sharper, more calculated. "I think they're delicious, Mom," Vivienne, my daughter, offered quietly. Her eyes darted between her husband and me, that familiar anxiety creasing her forehead. She'd been walking this tightrope for years, torn between defending her mother and pleasing her husband. I simply nodded and continued serving everyone at the table. My grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, were busy with their phones, oblivious to the tension. Henrietta, who had been Ellington's secretary for over 30 years and was now practically family, gave me a sympathetic glance. "Did you remember to make the appointment with the realtor?" George directed his question at Vivienne, but his eyes were on me. My hand stilled over the gravy boat. "What realtor?" George cleared his throat and straightened his expensive linen shirt, the one I'd ironed just that morning. "Well, Madeline, we've been meaning to discuss this with you. This house is simply too large for just one person." "This is my home," I said, the words coming out steadier than I felt. The 4-bedroom colonial had been where Ellington and I had raised our family, built our life. Every corner held memories. Vivian's height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the den where Ellington and I would stay up late discussing business strategies, the garden where I'd spent countless hours finding peace. "It's a financial burden," George continued, cutting into his roast with precise movements. "The property taxes alone are ridiculous, and frankly, the company can't sustain these kinds of expenses anymore." My company. Ellington and Madeline Enterprises. Though everyone seemed to forget the Madeline part since Ellington passed. "I pay the property taxes from my personal account," I reminded him. "The company doesn't cover that." George exchanged glances with Vivienne. "Mom," she began tentatively. We think, it might be better if you moved into Sunset Gardens." Sunset Gardens, the retirement community on the edge of town, where people went to be forgotten. "I'm 63, not 90, I said, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. "I don't need assisted living." George laughed, the sound grating against my ears. "It's not assisted living, Madeline. It's an independent living community, perfect for someone in your position." "And what position is that?" I asked, setting down my fork. He leaned back in his chair, Ellington's chair, and gestured broadly around the dining room. "Let's be honest, you've been playing the role of the family's housekeeper since Ellington died, cooking, cleaning, ironing my shirts. It's all you know how to do." The table fell silent. Even the children looked up from their phones. "George," Vivian gasped, but he wasn't finished. "The house will be sold. The company needs the capital, and quite frankly, Madeline, you need a reality check. You were the pretty wife who hosted dinner parties. Ellington was the business genius. Now that he's gone, it's time to face facts." My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my voice even. "And when exactly am I supposed to leave my home?" "We already have a buyer interested," George said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "You should be packed by the end of the month." Henrietta reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes said what she couldn't voice. "Don't let him do this." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the small key I kept on a chain around my neck. the key to Ellington's private safe. Inside was the document that George knew nothing about, the paper that would change everything. "That's interesting timing," I said, standing up slowly. Because tomorrow morning, I was planning to visit the company offices for the first time. In years. George's smug expression faltered. "What for?" I smiled. The kind of smile Ellington used to call my chess player smile. "To deliver some paperwork. Paperwork that my husband left regarding the true ownership structure of Ellington and Madeline Enterprises." The color drained from George's face. "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out tomorrow," I said, gathering the plates with steady hands. "But for now, since I'm apparently the family's housekeeper, I should clear the table." As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard Henrietta's chair scrape back. "I'll help you, Madeline," she said, following me. Behind us, George's voice rose. "This is ridiculous. She's bluffing." In the kitchen, away from prying eyes, I finally allowed my hands to shake as I set the dishes in the sink. 38 years. Of marriage, of building a business together, of creating a legacy, and this was what it had come to. "You're going to fight, aren't you?" Henrietta whispered, closing the kitchen door behind her. I touched the key hidden beneath my blouse. "Ellington always said timing was everything in business," I replied. "I think it's finally time." That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in Ellington's study. Nothing had been moved since his passing 3 years ago. His leather chair still held the indentation of his body, and his reading glasses remained on the desk where he'd last placed them. I ran my fingers over the polished mahogany surface, remembering. "You'll need to be patient, Maddie," he had told me during those final weeks, his voice weak but his mind still sharp. "Let George think he's won. Let them all underestimate you. It's your greatest advantage." I removed the key from around my neck and approached the painting that hung behind his desk, a landscape of the Montana mountains where we'd spent our honeymoon. Behind it was a small wall safe, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The key turned smoothly, and inside was a single manila envelope. I'd looked at these documents only once before, the day after Ellington's funeral. Back. Then I wasn't ready. The grief was too raw, and frankly, I hadn't yet experienced the full extent of George's ambition. But now, 3 years later, after watching him slowly dismantle everything Ellington and I had built together, I was more than ready. The document inside was simple but powerful. A partnership agreement, dated from the very beginning of the company, declaring Ellington and me equal partners in the business, not just in name, but in legal standing. And most importantly, a succession clause stating that upon the death of either partner, full control would transfer to the surviving spouse, not to children, not to sons-in-law, but to me. George had never seen this document. When Ellington died, I allowed George to believe what he wanted, that he would naturally take over since he had married Vivian and had been working at the company for 15 years. I let him move into Ellington's office. I even let him hang his pretentious business degree where Ellington's had been, but I never signed over my rights. I never transferred my shares. I simply stepped back and watched. The phone rang, startling me. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, are you okay?" Her voice was tentative, apologetic. "I'm fine, dear." I tucked the document back into its envelope. "I'm so sorry about today. George was completely out of line. He shouldn't have spoken to you that way." I sighed. This was Vivian's pattern. Allow George to behave outrageously, then call to apologize on his behalf. "He's just stressed about the company," she continued. "The board meeting next week has him on edge. There are rumors about a potential hostile takeover and—" "Vivian," I interrupted gently, "does George know that I own 51% of the company?" Silence stretched between us. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked. "Dad left. Everything to you but the company. George said Dad wanted him to take over, that it was always the plan. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. My own daughter had no idea of my role in building the business that bore my name. Your father and I were equal partners from day one, I explained. We decided early on that he would be the public face of the company. It was the 1980s, Vivian. People weren't as accepting of women in leadership roles. But you were just, she trailed off. Just what? The pretty wife who hosted dinner parties? I echoed George's cruel words. Is that what you believe too? No. Mom, of course not, she backpedaled. But you never came to the office. You never attended meetings. I laughed softly. I attended every important meeting. Your father wouldn't make a single major decision without me. We just did it in private, over dinner, in this very study. I glanced at the photographs on the wall, Ellington shaking hands with mayors, governors, even a president. In each photo, I stood slightly behind him, watching, observing. Do you remember when you were about 10 and Dad would sometimes bring home those big binders full of numbers? I asked. The quarterly reports, Vivian recalled. He'd spread them across the dining table after we went to bed. Yes. And by morning, they'd be filled with notes and corrections. Did you ever wonder who stayed up all night reviewing those reports? Another stretch of silence. Why didn't you ever say anything? She finally asked. Because it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as the work got done. I turned the old wedding band on my finger. Your father and I were a team. He was brilliant with people, with vision. I was better with numbers, with strategy. George isn't going to believe this, Vivian whispered. He doesn't have to believe it, I replied. The legal documents speak for themselves. I heard muffled voices on her end of the line, then George's voice growing closer. Is that your mother? Let me talk to her. His voice was tense, controlled anger vibrating beneath the surface. Before Vivian could respond, I said, Tell George. I'll see him at the office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. He can bring the company lawyers if he wants, but it won't change anything. I hung up before she could reply. Setting the phone down, I walked to the window that overlooked the garden. Ellington and I had planted together 30 years ago. The Japanese maple he'd given me for our 10th anniversary had grown massive, its red leaves catching the moonlight. A memory surfaced. Ellington and me sitting in this same study late one night, the business barely 2 years old, going over loan applications that had been rejected for the third time. They don't think we're good enough, Maddie, he had said, discouraged. I had taken the papers from him, recalculated the numbers, restructured the proposal. Then we'll prove them wrong, I'd told him. We don't need their approval. We just need their signatures. The next day, we'd secured the loan that saved the company. We had always been partners, equal in everything that mattered, and tomorrow, the world would finally know it. Sleep evaded me that night. By 5 a.m, I was already dressed in the navy blue suit I'd worn to Ellington's funeral, the last time I'd made a public appearance connected to the company. It still fit perfectly. I added pearl earrings, applied just enough makeup to look polished but not trying too hard, and swept my silver-streaked hair into a simple chignon. They expect a grieving widow or a doddering old fool, I told my reflection. Show them the businesswoman instead. The company headquarters was a 20-minute drive from my home. I hadn't been there in almost 3 years, but as I pulled into the reserved parking space that still bore Ellington's name, a familiar calm settled over me. This building, with its sleek glass facade and understated elegance, had been my idea. I'd found the property, negotiated the price down to almost half the asking, and worked with the architects on every detail. Yet as I stepped through the revolving doors into the marble lobby, I felt like a stranger. The young receptionist at the front desk didn't recognize me. "May I help you?" she asked politely. "Madeline Harrington to see George Whitley," I replied. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mrs. Harrington? Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize—" "It's quite all right," I assured her. "It's been a while." Mr. Whitley is in a meeting, but I can— That's perfect, I interrupted gently. I'll go up to my husband's office and wait for him there. Before she could object, I headed toward the elevator. As the doors closed behind me, I caught a glimpse of her frantically reaching for the phone. The executive floor was exactly as I remembered, though some of the artwork had changed. Modern abstract pieces had replaced the classic landscapes Ellington and I had selected together. Outside what used to be our office, a young assistant looked up in surprise as I approached. "Mrs. Harrington," she exclaimed, standing quickly. "We weren't expecting you." "I left a message for George last night," I replied. "Is he in?" "He's in. The conference room with the board," she explained nervously. "They've been there since 8. Something about an emergency meeting?" Of course. George was scrambling, trying to shore up support before I arrived. "Perfect timing," I said. "Could you show me to the conference room, please?" Her eyes darted toward the closed office door behind her. Mr. Whitley asked not to be disturbed. "He's expecting me," I assured her. She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Follow me." As we walked down the hallway, familiar faces appeared. Employees who had been with the company for years. They stopped in their tracks, staring in disbelief. "Mrs. Harrington? Is that Madeline? My goodness, it's been years." Theodore Coleman, our VP of Operations who had been with us since the beginning, emerged from his office, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Madeline!" he exclaimed, hurrying toward me. "What a wonderful surprise!" "Hello, Theo," I replied, warmly, accepting his hug. "It's good to see you." He lowered his voice. "Are you here about the meeting?" George called it first thing this morning. "Something about restructuring the leadership." "Yes," I nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here." Theo's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Well, that's interesting timing." We reached the conference room, its frosted glass doors concealing the occupants within. The assistant knocked tentatively, then opened the door. "Excuse me, Mr. Whitley," she began timidly. "Mrs. Harrington is here to see you." The room fell silent. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I stepped inside. Around the large oak table sat our board of directors, most of whom had been with us for decades. And at the head of the table, in Ellington's chair, sat George. His face paled. "Madeline," he said, quickly regaining his composure. "We weren't expecting you until 9. "I'm an early riser," I replied, smiling at the board members. "Good morning, everyone. It's been too long." Bernard Walsh, our oldest board member at 78, stood immediately. "Madeline, my dear," he said, coming around to kiss my cheek. "You look wonderful. We've missed you terribly." One by one, they greeted me, their genuine warmth a stark contrast to George's rigid posture. He remained seated, watching with narrowed eyes. "What brings you in today?" asked Patricia Reynolds, one of our few female board members. "I believe George knows," I replied, setting my handbag on the table and withdrawing the manila envelope. "But I'd be happy to explain." George stood abruptly. "We're in the middle of an important meeting, Madeline. Perhaps we could speak privately. Afterward?" "This concerns everyone in the room," I countered, maintaining my calm demeanor. "In fact, it directly relates to the restructuring I hear you were discussing." The board members exchanged glances. Bernard cleared his throat. "George was just proposing some significant changes to our leadership structure." "Perhaps you should join us, Madeline." "Absolutely not," George interjected. "This is a formal board meeting, and Mrs. Harrington is no longer actively involved in company operations." "Actually," I said, sliding the documents from the envelope, "that's precisely what we need to discuss." I handed copies to each board member, saving George's for last. "These are the original partnership agreements between Ellington and myself. As you can see, we were equal partners from the company's inception, with a succession clause that transfers full control to the surviving spouse." The room fell silent as they read. George snatched his copy, his face growing increasingly red. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "This document could be fabricated. Ellington never mentioned any of this." "It's genuine," Bernard said quietly, adjusting his reading glasses. "I witnessed the original signing. Ellington was very clear about his wishes." George's head snapped toward Bernard. "You knew about this?" The older man nodded. "Of course. Several of us did. We assumed you did too, given your position." "My position?" George echoed. "As interim CEO," Patricia clarified, "serving at Madeline's discretion until she was ready to step in or appoint a permanent replacement." The color drained from George's face as he realized the truth. He had never been more than a temporary caretaker. "This is ridiculous," he hissed, throwing the document down. "I've been running this company for 3 years." "And how has that been going?" I asked, opening another folder. "Should we discuss the financial reports from the last 12 quarters? The declining market share? The 3 major clients we've lost? Or perhaps the suspicious transfers to offshore accounts that began exactly 2 months after my husband's death?" A deathly silence fell over the conference room. George's face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, and finally, fear. "What transfers?" Patricia asked, her tone sharp. I nodded to Henrietta, who had slipped into the room quietly during the BI confrontation. She distributed another set of documents, financial records I'd spent months gathering with the help of Winston Blackwell, our former CFO who George had conveniently forced into early retirement. 3 separate transfers, I explained, each just under the reporting threshold, all to a shell company in the Caymans. The timing coincides perfectly with George's purchase of his new vacation home in Aspen, a property curiously not listed in his name, but in his brother's. The board members paged through the documents, murmuring among themselves. George's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. "This is slander," he growled. "You're manufacturing evidence because you're bitter. You've been irrelevant for years and you can't stand it." I didn't take the bait. "The records speak for themselves, George. But we can certainly have an independent audit if you prefer." "I think that would be prudent," Bernard agreed, looking deeply troubled. "George, these allegations are serious." "This is absurd," George sputtered. "You're all going to take the word of a housewife over mine? I've increased our stock value by 15%. "It should have been 40, came a voice from the doorway. Winston Blackwell stood there, silver-haired and dignified in his precisely tailored suit. George's face turned ashen. "Winston?" Patricia greeted him, surprised. "I thought you were enjoying retirement in Florida." "I was," Winston replied, stepping into the room. "Until Madeline called me 3 months ago with some concerning patterns in our financial reports." George turned to me, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You've been planning this for months?" "I've been watching you dismantle my husband's legacy for years," I corrected him. "The planning only began when I discovered you were stealing from us." While George sputtered indignantly, Winston continued, "Based on market conditions and our historical performance, our stock should be trading at nearly double its current value. Instead, we've been losing major clients and talented staff. The question is why?" I gestured for Winston to take a seat. "I believe I can answer that. George has been deliberately sabotaging client relationships to drive down our company's value." "That's preposterous," George exploded. "Why would I do that?" "Because," Winston replied, sliding another document across the table, "you've been in talks with Maxwell Holdings about a takeover. They've offered you a personal consulting contract worth $5 million annually for 5 years after the acquisition goes through." The board members gasped. Maxwell Holdings was our largest competitor, known for acquiring companies, stripping their assets, and laying off most of the workforce. "You were going to sell us out?" Theodore asked, his voice thick with betrayal. "Do you have any idea what Maxwell would do to this company? To our employees?" George's confidence finally cracked. "You don't understand. The market is changing. We needed to adapt or die. Maxwell has the resources we need to— To what? I interrupted. To destroy everything Ellington built? To throw hundreds of loyal employees out of work? To line your pockets while this company's legacy turns to dust? You're being emotional, George sneered, trying to regain control. This is business. Sometimes tough decisions are necessary. I couldn't agree more, I replied coolly, which is why my first decision as CEO is to terminate your employment, effective immediately. George laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. You can't do that. You need board approval for executive terminations. Actually, Bernard interjected, the partnership agreement is quite clear. As majority shareholder, Madeline has unilateral authority to appoint or remove executives. This is ridiculous, George sputtered, looking around the table for support, and finding none. Vivian won't stand for this. We'll contest it in court. You're welcome to try, I said calmly. Though I should mention that Vivian is the one who told me about the Aspen property. She found the deed while looking for your passport last month. His face drained of color. You're lying. My daughter may have been blinded by your charm for years, George, but she's not stupid. When she realized you were hiding assets from her, she started paying attention to other things too, like your late-night phone calls, your unexplained absences. I hadn't wanted to humiliate him this way, but he'd left me no choice. The board needed to understand exactly who they'd been trusting. With the company's future, I think we've heard enough, Patricia declared, standing. I move that we accept Madeline's return as CEO and authorize a full forensic audit of all financial transactions during George's tenure. Seconded, Bernard added immediately. All in favor? Patricia looked around the table. Every hand went up except for George's. This meeting is adjourned, I stated calmly. Security will escort you to clear out your office, George. Any company property in your possession should be returned by the end of business today. He stood slowly, his face a mask of hatred. You'll regret this, he hissed. All of you. The only thing I regret, I replied, is not doing this sooner. After George was escorted out, the board members surrounded me, their questions coming rapid fire. How much did I know about the current projects? Would I be making other personnel changes? What about the Maxwell Holdings situation? One step at a time, I assured them. First, we need to stabilize the company and reassure our clients. Winston has agreed to return temporarily as CFO until we can find a permanent replacement. Theodore will continue as VP of Operations. And Patricia, I'd like you to head our client retention task force. They nodded, clearly relieved by my decisive approach. What about Vivian? Bernard asked gently. This must be difficult for her. My heart ached at the thought of my daughter. She had called me in tears last night after finding more evidence of George's deception. She's taking some time to process everything, I replied. But she's stronger than she looks. She gets that from her father. And from you, Patricia corrected with a smile. After the meeting, I returned to what had once been Ellington's office, and was now mine. George had changed it significantly, replacing Ellington's comfortable, classic furniture with sleek, modern pieces that looked impressive, but felt cold and impersonal. This will all have to go, I told Henrietta, who had followed me in. Get me the number for that interior designer we used when we redid the conference rooms. What was his name? Marcus Delaney, she supplied. I already called him. He's available next week. I smiled, settling behind the desk. What would I do without you, Henrietta? Let's hope you never have to find out, she replied, setting a stack of files before me. These need your immediate attention. Client contracts, staffing issues, and the presentation for the Newton account. They're wavering since George's last meeting with them. Set up a lunch with Jackson Newton, I instructed. Tell him I have some ideas I'd like to discuss personally. Henrietta nodded, making notes. And what about the Labor Day dinner you were planning for Sunday? Should I cancel it? I considered this for a moment. The dinner had been meant as a peace offering to George, a final attempt to salvage our family relationship. But that bridge was now thoroughly burned. No, I decided, but change the guest list. Invite the senior staff and their families. It's time they saw the inside of the house they've been trying to take from me. Henrietta smiled knowingly. Shall I invite Vivian as well? I thought of my daughter, caught in the crossfire of a battle she hadn't asked for. Yes, I replied softly. Tell her I'd like her to come home. The weekend passed in a whirlwind of activity. I spent most of it at the office, reviewing reports and meeting with department heads. The company I found beneath George's mismanagement was both better and worse than I had feared. Our core business remained strong, but morale had plummeted, and several key projects had been deliberately neglected. He was setting us up to fail, Theodore explained during our Sunday morning strategy session. Making it look like a sale to Maxwell was the only viable option. By Monday morning, news of the leadership change had spread throughout the industry. My phone had been ringing nonstop with calls from clients, competitors, and reporters seeking comments. I instructed our PR team to issue a simple statement. Ellington and Madeline Enterprises announces the return of founder Madeline Harrington as CEO, reaffirming our commitment to the values and vision that built this company. I was reviewing the latest client retention reports when my assistant buzzed. Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Whitley is on line 1. He says it's urgent. My heart skipped a beat. Not for George, I was done with him, but because Mr. Whitley could only mean one thing. George was using the house phone. He was at my home. Put him through, I replied, keeping my voice steady. You think you've won, don't you? George's voice was slurred, suggesting he'd been drinking despite the early hour. George, where are you? Where do you think? He sneered. I'm in your precious house, the one you refuse to sell, the one you're so sentimental about. A cold fear gripped me. Is Vivian with you? Vivian? He laughed bitterly. Your daughter wants nothing to do with me. She's moved in with her friend Caroline, in case you haven't noticed. Didn't even have the decency to tell me to my face. Just left a note saying she needs time to think. Relief washed over me. At least Vivian was safe. George, you need to leave the house. You don't live there anymore. Don't I? He challenged. Last I checked, I'm still married to your daughter. That makes me family. Isn't that what you always preached? Family first? Family doesn't steal, I replied coldly. Family doesn't lie, and manipulate and try to throw each other out on the street. He was silent for a moment. Then, I want to make a deal. What kind of deal? Reinstate me as CEO. Give me control of the European division like you promised Ellington you would. Do that, and I'll forget everything that happened. We can go back to the way things were. I almost laughed at his audacity. The way things were? With you embezzling from the company and planning to sell us out to Maxwell? With you treating me like the help in my own home? That's your idea of a deal? I have information, he persisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Things about the company that you don't know. Arrangements Ellington made that were never put in writing. You're bluffing, I said. And even if you weren't, I don't care. There's nothing you could tell me that would make me trust you again. Fine, he spat. Then I guess I'll just have to find another way to make you understand. You'd be amazed how quickly a house can fall apart when nobody's taking care of it. My blood ran cold. What have you done? Nothing yet, he replied, an ugly smile in his voice. But I've got all day. Maybe I'll start with Ellington's precious study. All those books he collected, all those photographs. Would be a shame if something happened to them. I stood, gesturing frantically to Henrietta, who had just entered my office. George, listen to me carefully. If you damage anything in that house, I will press charges. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, you'll end up in jail. You wouldn't dare, he scoffed. Think of the scandal. Think of what it would do to Vivian. Vivian already knows what kind of man you are, I replied, covering the mouthpiece to whisper to Henrietta. Call security at the house. Now. You know what your problem is, Madeline? George continued, oblivious. You've always underestimated me. You think you're so clever with your secret documents and your loyal board members. But I'm always one step ahead. Is that why you're drunk at 10 in the morning, breaking into my house and making threats? I countered. Because you're so far ahead? His breathing changed, becoming heavier, angrier. You think you can humiliate me and get away with it? You think you can take everything from me? You did that to yourself, George. No, he growled. This is your fault. Everything was fine until you decided to interfere. Ellington knew his place. He understood business. You're just a bitter old woman who can't accept that her time has passed. I heard a crash in the background. Glass breaking. My heart raced, thinking of Ellington's collection of antique decanters, the family photos on the mantelpiece, all the irreplaceable memories he was threatening. George, stop this now, I warned. Security is already on their way. He laughed. By the time they get here, I'll be done. And don't think this ends today. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I'll tell them how you manipulated Ellington, how you were never the brilliant partner you pretend to be. Another crash, louder this time. I've already spoken with Maxwell, he continued. They're still interested in acquiring the company, with or without my help. They're prepared to launch a hostile takeover. Your precious board won't be able to stop it. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. You're making a mistake, George. No, your mistake was thinking you could win against me. I'll destroy everything you care about, starting with this house. I heard sirens in the background, followed by pounding on the door and shouted commands to open up. That would be security, I said. And the police, from the sound of it. This isn't over, George hissed. It is for you, I replied, and hung up. I collapsed back into my chair, my hands trembling. Henrietta rushed in, her face pale. Security caught him, she reported. He broke several windows and smashed some furniture in the living room, but they stopped him before he could reach Ellington's study. I nodded, struggling to compose myself. And the police? They're taking him into custody now, breaking and entering, vandalism, making threats. It's all on record since he called from the house phone. The security team had their body cameras on too. Relief washed over me, followed by a profound sadness. This was Vivian's husband, my grandchildren's father. How had it come to this? My phone rang again. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. Mom? Her voice was shaking. Is it true? They've arrested George? I'm afraid so, dear, I said gently. He broke into the house and started destroying things. He was threatening to burn Ellington's study. She began to sob. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should have seen what he was doing. I should have stopped him. None of this is your fault, I assured her. George made his own choices. What happens now? She asked, sounding lost. Now? I sighed. Now we pick up the pieces, together. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long moment, gathering my thoughts. Then I picked up the phone again and dialed Bernard Walsh's number. Madeline, he answered. I just heard about George. Are you all right? I'm fine, I assured him. But we need to move quickly. George mentioned that Maxwell is still planning to pursue a hostile takeover. We need to call an emergency board meeting. I'll handle it, Bernard promised. For what it's worth, I always knew you were the real strength behind this company. Ellington was the same way in private. He never made a decision without asking. What would Madeline say? A small smile crossed my lips. We were partners in everything. And now you'll save his legacy, Bernard said confidently, just as he always knew you would. 6 months passed in a blur of 18-hour days. Emergency. board meetings, and intense negotiations. The damage George had done was extensive, but not irreparable. One by one, I reclaimed the pieces of my husband's legacy, our legacy, that had nearly been lost. The attempted hostile takeover by Maxwell Holdings failed when their investors got wind of the forensic audit we were conducting. No one wanted to be associated with potential financial fraud. Their stock took a hit, while ours gradually recovered. The house repairs were completed within weeks. I took the opportunity to make some changes, updating Ellington's study to include a second desk beside his, redecorating the living room in brighter colors, planting a new garden of vibrant perennials that would return year after year. On a warm spring afternoon, 6 months to the day from that fateful Labor Day, I hosted another family gathering. But this time, everything was different. Vivienne arrived first, looking healthier than she had in years. The divorce proceedings were nearly complete, and George had accepted a plea deal on the vandalism and embezzlement charges, community service and restitution instead of jail time, provided he stayed away from me, Vivienne, and the company. "The roses look beautiful, Mom," Vivienne remarked as we walked through the garden. "I don't remember them being quite so vibrant." "I planted new ones," I explained. "Varieties that can withstand harsher conditions. They take more work, but they're stronger for it." She smiled, understanding the metaphor. "Like us." Exactly like us. Emma and Tyler joined us in the garden, each carrying a bouquet of wildflowers they'd picked from the meadow behind the house. At 12 and 14, they were still adjusting to their parents' separation, but they seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the tension that had permeated their home for so long. "Grandma, can I have the room with the window seat when I stay over next weekend?" Emma asked, slipping her hand into mine. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, surprised by the request. It had been years since the children had asked to stay overnight. George had always made excuses. They were too busy. The house was too old-fashioned. There wasn't enough for them to do. "And can I use Grandpa's telescope?" Tyler added. "Dad never let me touch it, but now that I'm taking astronomy." "Your grandfather would have loved that," I assured him. In fact, he left notebooks full of observations. They're in his study, in the bottom drawer of the desk. "You're welcome to them." Tyler's face lit up. "Really? That's awesome." One by one, the other guests arrived. Theodore and his wife Maria, Winston and his partner James, Henrietta and her daughter Sophia, Bernard and Patricia, and several other key members of the company's leadership team, along with their families. The house that had felt so empty for so long was suddenly full of laughter and conversation. As we gathered around the table for dinner, I looked at the faces of these people who had stood by me, who had believed in me when I was ready to give up. They weren't just colleagues, they were family in all the ways that mattered. "Before we begin," I said, raising my glass, "I want to thank all of you for your support over these past 6 months. When Ellington died, I thought the heart of this company died with him. I withdrew into myself, allowed others to take control, and nearly lost everything we had built together." Bernard nodded encouragingly, while Henrietta dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. But then I was reminded of something Ellington used to say: "A house is only as strong as its foundation." I smiled at Vivienne, who had heard this phrase countless times growing up. This company, this family, this home, they all stand on foundations that Ellington and I built together. And while the structures may change, may need repairs, may even need to be completely rebuilt at times, the foundation remains solid. I raised my glass higher. To foundations that endure, and to new structures that rise from them. To foundations, they echoed, raising their glasses in return. After dinner, as the evening mellowed into comfortable conversation, Vivienne found me in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask you something," she began hesitantly. "The townhouse I'm renting, it's fine for now, but with the divorce settlement taking so long, I'm not sure when I'll be able to afford something more permanent for the kids and me. I set down the coffee pot. What did you have in mind? She took a deep breath. I was wondering if you'd consider letting us move back here. Not permanently, just until I can get back on my feet. The kids love this house, and with it being so large. Vivian, I interrupted gently, this has always been your home too. You and the children are welcome to stay as long as you need. Relief washed over her face. Really? You wouldn't mind the noise, the chaos? I laughed. After 3 years of silence, I'd welcome it. She hugged me then, something she hadn't done spontaneously in years. Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on the company. For not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve your faith. That's what family does, I replied, holding her tight. We believe in each other, even when, especially when, no one else does. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Vivian had taken the children home to pack overnight bags for their impending stay, I sat alone in Ellington's, our study. The familiar scent of leather-bound books and his favorite aftershave still lingered, fainter now but present, like a gentle reminder of his enduring influence. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood of his desk, now positioned beside my own in a perfect symmetry that reflected our partnership. On the wall hung a new photograph, Ellington and me on our 30th anniversary, dancing under the stars in the garden, unaware of the camera. We were looking at each other with such love, such complete understanding, that it almost hurt to see it now. We did it, Ellington, I whispered to the empty room. We saved it all. I could almost hear his reply, the words he'd said so often throughout our marriage. We built it together, Maddie. Of course we saved it together. I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known since his passing. The house around me was quiet, but no longer empty. Soon it would be filled with the voices of my grandchildren, with Vivian's laughter, with new memories being made alongside the cherished old ones. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11. Tomorrow would be another busy day at the office, meetings with clients, strategy sessions with the board, the constant work of rebuilding what had nearly been lost. But tonight, in this moment, all was well. I had reclaimed my home, my company, my family. And most importantly, I had reclaimed myself. Not just as Ellington's widow, not just as Vivian's mother, but as Madeline Harrington, a woman who had built an empire alongside her husband and now stood firmly at its helm. I closed the study door softly behind me, leaving the past contained while embracing the future that stretched before me. Unexpected, challenging, and entirely my own.